Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Celebrate, a holiday origins podcast. I'm your host, Rusty Brown, and today we're celebrating the Spring Equinox, or Ostara. This is the podcast where each episode I research a specific holiday and discuss the history behind it, how the people before us celebrated it, how it evolved into what we celebrate now. And for this season, since the holidays I'll be discussing are older holidays that haven't been popularly celebrated in the recent past, I will be discussing how people have been reconnecting to these holidays and how we can incorporate those traditions and celebrate these old holidays in a new way, in hopes that everyone can reconnect to these holidays despite their religious or spiritual backgrounds, so that we can reconnect to the earth and its seasons to possibly heal the earth and even find some healing within ourselves. Each episode includes a CeLibation, that's a themed cocktail that goes along with the holiday that you can make at home so you can celebrate along with me as you listen. The CeLibation for this episode is a hibiscus gin sour. When deciding on this cocktail, I was looking for something floral that incorporated eggs to symbolize the fertility that's dominant this time of the year. And I wanted a gin-based CeLibation because of its woodsy, floral, and evergreen notes. The hibiscus also makes the CeLibation a beautiful pink color to go along with our pastel spring theme. To make this CeLibation, you need 1 egg white, 3 ounces of gin, 3/4 ounces of lime juice, a 1/2 ounce of hibiscus simple syrup. And to make the simple syrup, you just need 1 cup of water, 1 cup of sugar, and 3/4 cup of dried hibiscus flowers that you'll simmer all together for about 15 minutes. Take off of the heat and then let cool for 20 minutes or so. You want to strain it and then stick it in the fridge. To make the CeLibation, add all of those ingredients to a cocktail shaker with ice and shake really hard for 30 seconds to get the egg white to create this beautiful froth on the top. You can obviously omit the egg. It mainly makes the froth and gives it a nice kind of creamy mouthfeel. But if you're a vegan or if you're just not into eggs in your beverages, then take it out. You'll just have a nice pink gin sour that won't have the froth on top. For a mocktail CeLibation, you can make the hibiscus simple syrup and add it to a ginger ale along with the lime juice. To get the piney gin flavors, you can add some rosemary or juniper berries if you can find them with the hibiscus flowers when you're making the simple syrup. I know that last episode I said I would be doing an episode about the Wheel of the Year in general, but unfortunately my actual job has gotten busier than normal, and I haven't been able to devote the time that I needed to get that episode out before this one. And I wanted to get this one out, obviously, in time for the Spring Equinox. I have done the research for that episode, but I just need to find the time to write and record it, and hopefully before the Beltane episode, I'll get that out for you. So last month's episode, I celebrated Imbolc. And if you listened to that episode and either incorporated some new to you traditions into your celebrations, or if you have your own ways of celebrating Imbolc, I'd love to hear about how you celebrate it. Did you incorporate candles into your celebrations? Did you spend time outdoors breathing in the changes of the seasons? Did you build a bonfire? Did you cook any of the foods associated with Imbolc, or possibly make a Bridget's cross? Or did you do some kind of cleansing? You can email me at letscelebratepodcast@gmail.com with your celebratory stories. I also have an Instagram page that you can follow, and that is at Let's Celebrate Podcast. And if you prefer to watch the episodes on YouTube, I also have a YouTube channel, and that is youtube.com/@letscelebratepodcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, then you can leave your celebratory stories in the comments below as well. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. So this year was my first year celebrating Imbolc as basically all of these Wheel of the Year celebrations. I've done kind of things that are similar, but I haven't just devoted time to celebrate these holidays like I am trying to this year. So I wasn't exactly sure how to celebrate on my own. I did bake several cakes and I ate a lot of cheese and milk during the week, but honestly, that's pretty normal for me. I did do some spring cleaning. I organized one of my closets, and on the night of Imbolc, I lit some candles and saged my home. I did think about making a Bridget's cross, but I'm still not sure what a rush is and where to find it around here or what I could use in its place. I suppose I could have Googled that, but I just didn't. I also found a women's group that did a 3-day Imbolc celebration via Zoom that I participated in so that I could kind of understand like how other people are celebrating Imbolc. They used the astronomical winter solstice and the astronomical spring equinox to calculate Imbolc. So they celebrated on the 6th and 7th of February and actually cited that February 4th was the solar Imbolc and February 9th was the lunar Imbolc, which I had not read about before this gathering, I learned something. It mostly focused on connecting to our feminine womb space since Imbolc means in the belly or in the womb. And they did meditations and had discussions about the importance of connecting to our womb space in order to connect with ourselves and to other women and planting seeds for the future. That kind of stuff. It was very interesting and very informative. So if you get an opportunity to, I just found that they sent me an email and I was like, well, I'm doing this podcast on Imbolc, so I'll just sign up and see what this is all about. So yeah, I recommend if you're interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, then when things pop into your email, then maybe say yes. So let's celebrate the spring equinox, or Ostara, as many people are calling it these days. Ostara, or the spring equinox, also known as the vernal equinox, is the first equinox in our modern year and also the first quarter festival of the wheel of the year. It usually happens between March 19th and the 23rd, and this year in 2024, it's falling on March 19th. It's a celebration of renewal and rebirth because this is the time of the year when the sun begins to shine again, the days are getting longer, and with the new sunshine comes new growth and new birth in nature. Equinox is actually Latin for equa, meaning equal, and nox, meaning night, meaning that it's when the hours of the night and day are equal in length. This also happens at the fall equinox, which is why that's also called equinox. In the northern hemisphere, this marks the beginning of spring and the beginning of autumn in the southern hemisphere. The name Ostara is actually not the ancient name for this festival. That name was given by Aidan Kelly in the mid-1960s for the modern pagan wheel of the year. And Aidan Kelly is an American academic and prominent Wiccan figure who also did a lot of research just in general about holidays. He wrote a book that I believe was called Religious Holidays and Calendars as well, because he was also, like me, interested in just holidays and their significance to the past. In the past several years, I've noticed that Ostara is now the popular name referring to the spring equinox, at least like on the internet, on social media, and stuff like that. Aidan Kelly said that he was inspired to use the name Ostara by the writings of Saint Bede from the 8th century, also known as the Venerable Bede. And Bede wrote a book called The Reckoning of Time, and in it he explained that Eostra Moneth was named after an Anglo-Saxon goddess named Eostra. And during that month, which is our modern day April, they held feasts in her honor during that month. Bede's account of Eostra is actually the only ancient documentation that has been discovered that references this goddess, so it's debated if she actually was a prominent goddess of the time. And there's no other account of how the ancient people celebrated the goddess, besides that feasts were held in her honor in Eostra Moneth or April. The name Ostara actually originated in 1835 from Jacob Grimm, the folklorist that you probably know as part of the Brothers Grimm, in his book, Dutch Mythology. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. It means Dutch mythology. However, in 1958, there was a discovery of 150 Romano-Germanic votive inscriptions to the Matrinae Austriaceae. Also, might not be pronouncing that right. They were found to be a triad of goddesses, and these votives were made in Germany dating from approximately 150 to 250 AD. And some scholars have connected this triad of goddesses to Eostra or Ostara, saying that the name Austri has similar linguistic origins as the Old English Eostra, which I believe both mean east. Though it's still debated if these goddesses have anything to do with the goddess Eostra, who Bede described, it is true, however, that Bede was alive during the time of England's Christianization, and that would have given him the opportunity to learn about the old gods and goddesses that would have been worshipped in the area during his lifetime. Pagan gods and goddesses haven't been worshipped in the area since the 6th or 7th century, so it's very likely that a spring goddess did exist, but the Christian Easter celebration has taken precedence and has just completely erased the history. Even though there isn't ancient documentation about Ostara or Eostra, there are legends associated with her and rabbits and eggs, which are both symbols of fertility and rebirth. One specific legend says that she found a frozen dying bird that she transformed into a hare in order to save it. And it said that the hare continued to lay colored eggs after its transformation and would lay colored eggs to show its gratitude for Ostara once a year for her festival. The spring equinox has been celebrated since prehistoric times as a sacred time of the year. This is a time when day and night come into balance. The amount of dark and daylight is exactly identical, so it's a reminder that winter's ending and spring is emerging. Ancient people used the equinoxes and solstices to map out their lives, so it's not far-fetched that they would have a goddess for this time of year that they would have worshipped, and why they would have named a month after her. Even though we don't have an official name for the ancient spring equinox festival, we do know that it was an important day for many ancient cultures. In Rome, Bacchanalia was celebrated by ancient Romans, and this was a festival for their god of wine, freedom, intoxication, and ecstasy, Bacchus. This would have been celebrated on the spring equinox. I also read that it was celebrated 3 days of the year. I couldn't find a lot of information about how this was celebrated. It seems to be a mystery religion, so there's not a lot of information that was passed down. This is all kept secret. I read some places that they celebrated this on the spring equinox as well as 2 other days. The ancient Druids celebrated Alban Eiler, and the Iranians and Persians celebrated Nowruz, which was their new year at the spring equinox. In Japan, they have a public Shinto holiday for the vernal equinox called Shunbun no Hai. I believe that's how you say it, but I also don't speak Japanese. And the ancient Mayans celebrated the equinoxes all over Central America. There are several pyramids built to calculate the equinoxes. And the Chichen Itza has a snake that appears as the sun sets on the equinoxes that symbolically join the heaven, earth, and the underworld with the transition between day and night. And the most modernly popular spring equinox festivals don't actually fall on the equinox, but the equinox is used to determine the date. And those are the Christian festival Easter, that's held on the first Sunday after the full moon following the vernal equinox, and Passover, which falls on the first new moon following the vernal equinox. And March 25th, which is also for the, I think it's the Julian calendar, was the spring equinox for the Romans, they had the feast day of the Annunciation to the Blessed Virgin Mary, also known as Gabrielmas or Lady Day in England. It's said to be the day that Archangel Gabriel told Mary that she would conceive and bear Jesus through a virgin birth. And Ostara modernly is the Sabbat, or a holiday marked on the pagan wheel of the year, dedicated to the spring equinox, and is the celebration of rebirth and renewal. The spring equinox has themes of new beginnings, fertility, balance, new life, and rebirth. It's believed to be a good time to literally and figuratively begin planting seeds for the future. Historically, this is a time of beginnings, fertility, action, planting, balance, abundance, feasting, and socializing. And it's a reminder to welcome back life after the cold, dark winter. So, how did Ostara, or the spring equinox, evolve into holidays we now know today? As I mentioned earlier, Ostara is associated with the Christian festivals of Easter and Passover. Easter also gets its name from Ostara, which is where Ostara is also believed to derive from. Easter and Passover are both movable feasts, and that's like what I said earlier, meaning that they don't have a set date, but the date's determined by the lunar solar calendar, and both use the spring equinox to determine the date that they fall on. And if you're interested in learning more about Easter, I did an entire episode on Easter last year, so you can listen to that episode for a deeper dive into the Easter holiday history and tradition, so I don't have to repeat myself. The holiday known as Ostara has been celebrated by pagans since the mid-1960s, so it's, like I said, not an ancient festival like the internet will lead you to believe. It's said to be based on ancient traditions and uses themes I mentioned earlier of beginnings, fertility, action, planting, balance, abundance, feasting, and socializing in its celebrations. And the spring equinox is a significant day for many ancient cultures. They just didn't call it by the name Ostara. And many of the ancient traditions have now become what we in the US celebrate as Easter traditions, and now the newly reanimated holiday Ostara. A lot of people celebrate Ostara very similarly to Easter, but it's like almost like they've taken Christianity out of it, but they're still using the same themes because I guess they say that Christianity stole those themes from nature and from pagans, and so they're taking those traditions back. When you really boil it down there, everybody's still kind of celebrating it similarly. So how was the spring equinox celebrated in the past? Historically, the spring equinox has been a time of reawakening of the earth and the light after the cold darkness of the winter time. It's when the trees that were dormant come back to life, flowers start to bloom, and lots of new babies are born. Because of this rebirth of plants and animals, this time of year is symbolized by bunnies, eggs, lambs, spring flowers, and clovers because of their fertility and new life significance. In my Easter episode from last year, I went more in depth into the symbolism of bunnies and eggs and their association with Easter and springtime, so I recommend that you listen to that episode if you're interested in learning more about bunnies and eggs and Easter. Pastel colors are the colors that are historically associated with spring equinox, and those are colors like green, pink, violet, baby blue, and these are prominent colors in nature at this time of the year, so that's why they are the colors for springtime. And if you listen to my Imulk episode, the last episode I did, you'll know that Imulk is when many people began planting seeds, both literally and figuratively, for the new year. So the spring equinox is a reminder to check in on those seeds and possibly to start to take action on your plans and begin to bring them into reality. There's not much known about the Roman Bacchanalia festivals, like I said, because they were celebrated by mystery cults of the time who held them in secret. What is known was written by a Roman historian by the name of Livy, And he said that these festivals were held for the god Bacchus, who was based on the Greek Dionysus and the Dionysian mysteries. And Livy wrote that originally Bacchanalia was celebrated by women only, and it was 3 days of the year during daylight, but evolved into a celebration that occurred at nighttime and allowed both men and women. It involved feasting, drinking wine to excess, leading to drunkenness, and a free mingling of both the sexes and the social classes. The rites were also said to include loud music. So it seemed like it was just a grand old party full of revelry. I found in many articles about Ostara where people said that Bacchanalia would have been celebrated on the spring equinox, but the articles I found about Bacchanalia didn't specify when they would take place besides a description of 3 days a year. Also in ancient Rome, there was a goddess named Cybele who had a consort named Attis, who was believed to be born via a virgin birth, and that he died and was resurrected each year during the vernal equinox on the Julian calendar, which is between March 22nd and March 25th. They also had a Holy Week that was held from March 15th through the 28th that celebrated Attis's birth, death, and rebirth, and ended with what was most likely an initiation into the mysteries of the Magna Mater and Attis. But that is not known specifically because mystery cult. The ancient Druids celebrated Avon Iler, but I couldn't find much info about how they actually celebrated. Stonehenge is a very popular Druid monument that you've probably heard of, and many people visit this day on the equinoxes, but mostly on the solstice because it's the winter solstice where the sun sets or rises. I think it's rises. The sun rises on the winter solstice, like in the center, like it's an altar, like a church altar, right? When you step into it, you see the sun rise directly in the center, but only on the winter solstice. So they're not really sure if the equinox actually has historic significance, but many people go there for the spring equinox nowadays. And though it isn't for sure, Stonehenge is believed to be a form of sacred ancient calendar, so it could possibly have some kind of significance to the spring equinox. There are many other similar monuments throughout the world that people gather in and could have possibly been a site for ancient people to gather during these Wheel of the Year festivals. I also read in several blogs and on some of the YouTube videos that I watched that walking a labyrinth was an ancient tradition, but I couldn't actually find any sources that confirmed that. But what I can tell from what I read and what I watched is that you set an intention or ask a question, and then it's basically like a meditation. You're walking, and then it gives you time to think about your intention or your question and coming up for an answer. So with the spring equinox being a time for planting seeds, you can, think about the seed that you figuratively want to plant for this year, and then walk the labyrinth to contemplate how you are planning on doing that. Nowruz is the Persian and Iranian spring equinox festival that began with the Achaemenians, who were a dynasty of Persian kings, and has its roots in Zoroastrianism, which is considered the world's oldest monotheistic religion and was one of the most important religions in the ancient world from 600 BC to 650 CE. I had actually never heard of that religion until I read this article. You just learn something new every day. Nowruz means new day, and it's observed for 13 days in many Persian countries, even today. And it's a celebration of hope and renewal. Iran has a festival called Chahar Shanbeh Suri that takes place right before Nowruz, and people celebrate by purifying their homes and leap over fires to welcome the celebration of Nowruz. And in Japan, they have a public holiday for the vernal equinox called Shunbun no Hai, and it became a public holiday in 1948 due to the separation of religion and state, but before 1945, it was a Shinto holiday. And it's part of a 7-day period of festivals called Haru no Higan or Haru no Higan. In ancient Japan, this holiday was a time to pay homage to the ancestors and visit grave sites of loved ones. It was also a time to refresh and renew their lives, and they would clean their homes and make life changes like beginning or ending something. It's a celebration for the beginning of the spring and appreciation of nature's new life after a long winter. And the ancient Mayans in Central America have celebrated the equinoxes for at least 10 centuries with several pyramids that have features that are illuminated by the equinox sunsets. And people still gather at these monuments to celebrate the equinoxes, though I couldn't actually find how people celebrated. But I feel like it would probably something similar with feasts and dancing, singing, probably fires. Of course, that's just me generalizing or kind of coming up with my own idea because of like what I've read about other cultures. If you know how the Mayans, the ancient Mayans, would have celebrated, I'd love to hear that. So leave me a comment, send me an email, celebratory stories. And as I said, Easter and Passover both correspond with the spring equinox, and they have historically been celebrated with feasts. And as I mentioned, I did an entire episode on Easter last year, so please listen to that episode for more details about Easter history. The ancient Saxons baked buns with a cross cut on the top for the beginning of spring, and the cross represented the rebirth of the world after the winter, and also the 4 quarters of the moon and the 4 seasons of the wheel of the year. These buns are now called hot cross buns and are a Christian tradition, with the cross representing the cross that Jesus died on and his resurrection at Easter. The ancient Celtic people celebrated by lighting a bonfire, which symbolized the return of warmth and light to the world, and would have been accompanied by feasting, dancing, and singing. And a well-known tale from Celtic mythology is of a horned god of the forest, Cernunnos, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, whom the ancient Celtic people invoked during the spring equinox as a symbol of renewal and rebirth. He was depicted as half man, half deer, with antlers on top of his head, and according to legend, he represented the cycle of life and death in the natural world, and was believed to have the power to bring new life to the land. And in my home state, Arkansas, the Plum Bayou Mounds Archaeological State Park, formerly Toltec Mound State Park, has mounds that the ancient Native Americans that lived in that area used as a calendar. And on the equinoxes and solstices, the sun sets directly in the center of a specific mound so that the people would know what time of the year it was. The Plum Bayou people used the mound complex for ceremonial activities like games, feasts, and other special celebrations. They now open the park for sunset tours on the evenings of equinoxes and solstices. And it's actually because of these events that my eyes were opened several years ago to the importance of the equinoxes and solstices to ancient cultures. So, how do people celebrate spring equinox today? In many cultures and traditions throughout history and today, the equinox is celebrated with feasting. Many people incorporate eggs into their feasts, with boiled eggs and deviled eggs being popular options. Also, fresh local seasonal produce is usually incorporated as well to celebrate the new food that is available at this time of the year. So things like salads, think fresh. Lamb and chicken are common protein options, and hot crust buns are also a spring equinox tradition for both Christian and pagans alike. And for many cultures, this is the time to spend with loved ones. Many people in Japan celebrating Shunbun no Hai return to their family home to spend time with their families. And we all know that Easter is a very important day for families to gather to feast together. And also in many cultures, some kind of spring cleaning is popular at this time of year. Many of the Japanese people who celebrate Shunbun no Hai, as well as people who celebrate Ostara, take time to clean their homes, which is symbolic of the year starting anew. The spring cleaning doesn't have to be limited to the home. Other spaces you live in could probably use some cleaning, like your car, office, or maybe even your computer files or emails. Some people actually see the spring equinox as the new year instead of the one more commonly celebrated at the beginning of January in the dead of winter. And many of the people who celebrate it as the new year refer to this time as Ostara. They see it as a reminder to take action of the goals or ideas that began to be planted at Yule or Imbolc. And they believe that what's planted during Ostara will be ready to harvest at Beltane, Litha, or Lugnasad, which I will be discussing all of those holidays in the next episodes over the course of this year. Decorating the home for the spring equinox is also a fun way for people to celebrate nowadays. This can be the entire home, one room, or just a table or a small space in the home. Some people might refer to this as an altar. Some people just refer to it as Easter decorations. I always change out my decor on my dining table for the seasons, and I never called it an altar, but then a friend came over and asked, "What is this on your table? Is it an altar?" And I was like, it's just something I've always done. But I mean, when you think about it, like, what's the difference between an altar and decorations? Because an altar is like bringing items into your home to celebrate the season, basically. When you think about decorating your home for the seasons or for holidays, it's kind of like you're making an altar out of your entire home. If you're like for Christmas time, if you're decorating your whole house, you're basically making your house an altar to the season. That's just my take on it. Some traditional decor for the spring equinox are eggs that represent fertility, abundance, and birth, and rabbits that also represent fertility and birth and abundance, and fresh spring flowers, seeds, candles, and soft pastel colors. Popular spring flowers include crocuses, daffodils, hyacinths, primroses, pussy willows, and violets. The colors of this time of year are pastels, like I said, and also bright colors of springs, so light pinks and blues, purples, and bright greens like the fresh green grass that's growing and the pastel flowers that are blooming. So the colors that you see in nature are what you're bringing into your home. For some people who celebrate Ostara, they also see the serpent as a symbol for Ostara, since it wakes from its winter hibernation as the earth begins to come alive. It starts laying its eggs and it sheds its skin, so like becoming new again. And also it enjoys soaking up the warm sun again. So all of these things go with the theme of Ostara and the spring equinox. Also, since the spring equinox is all about the natural world coming back to life, this is a time when people begin planting and sowing literal and metaphorical seeds. So starting new projects, setting new goals, making new changes, or just starting a garden. And of course, as with all of these Wheel of the Year holidays, bonfires are a very popular way for many cultures to ring in the spring equinox, either on the eve of or the night of. So, how can we incorporate all of these ideas that we've just discussed into celebrating the spring equinox now? Since the spring equinox is all about rebirth and renewal, both physically and spiritually, literally and metaphorically. This is a good time to start working with yourself to discover what new growth you're wanting to see in your life this year, and what do you need to change, nurture, or clear away to allow this new growth. You can also literally plant seeds, start a vegetable, herb, or flower garden, whatever you have space for. You can do something indoors if it's still cold in your area. You can, yeah, start your flowers, your seeds indoors until it starts getting warm. Or you can, if you don't even have a space outdoors, you can start a little window herb garden. If you're interested, like this is the time to start the planting the seeds. You can also do some meditation on what you're wanting to grow metaphorically in your life, and do some journaling, start working on ways to make or achieve your goals. If you have space at your home, or if you know somewhere that has a labyrinth, you can walk a labyrinth to meditate on these ideas if that's something that is available to you. And as you're planting your seeds, be sure to bless them with your intention for them to grow. So this is a way to kind of like add some spirituality to the planting of the seeds. If you have physical seeds, you can hold them in the sunlight and empower them with your intention before placing them in the soil. And if you have seeds of your own personal growth that you're planting, then be sure to set your intention when you're journaling and meditating on your goals and ideas. And as I said, feasting is a great way to celebrate. So gathering with loved ones over food is the perfect way to celebrate the spring equinox. This can be a full-blown feast or just a small tea party or outdoor picnic. You'll just want to incorporate some spring foods into your celebration. So incorporating fresh fruits and vegetables that are sprouting at this time in your area, lamb or chicken if you eat meat, and maybe even some edible flowers if you can find them. And you'll definitely want to have an egg-based dish or dessert like egg salad, custard, or frittatas. Yeah, basically fresh and light is the idea. You can serve the hibiscus gin sour, the CeLibation for this episode. This is like spring in a glass, basically. And if you're a gluten eater, you can try some hot cross buns. You can pick some up at a local bakery. I know many bakeries make them around this time of year, or you can try your hand at making them yourself this year. I don't eat gluten, and I haven't tried making these rolls, but I'm kind of interested in asking Pinterest if I can make some gluten-free hot cross buns this year. So maybe I will. I'll let you guys know in the next episode if that is a success. Decorating eggs is also a fun way to celebrate with your loved ones, and you can also get kids involved into the celebrations with that. To add some Ostara magical flair to this common Easter tradition, you can write your goal or the seed that you intend to plant on your eggs. You can use a white crayon to do this, and then soak your egg in the dye for a crayon resist effect to enhance your intentions. You can also spring clean your home to welcome in the new beginning. Spring clean, organize, clean out your home, clean out your car, clean out your computer, whatever you need to do to feel fresh and new, to start anew with the earth. And after you've cleaned your home, you can decorate it with pastel colors and symbols of spring that we've discussed. And with all the changing seasons, celebrate by going out in nature, looking at what's blooming and changing, and breathe in those changes and meditate on it. You can also, like the ancient Japanese people used to do for their spring equinox festival, pay homage to your ancestors and visit grave sites of your loved ones. So the main themes that we've discussed of the spring equinox are life, birth, and resurrection. We see this theme throughout all the cultures who celebrate this holiday, and we see this in Christianity with the death and resurrection of Jesus, as well as in the Roman legend of Attis and his death and resurrection. And when you pay attention, you'll notice that nature seemingly dies every year, that spring brings new life to those plants and trees that seem to be dead, which can be interpreted as a resurrection. And with it comes the light and longer days. And with this new life and new light comes hope for the future of a continuation of life and the joy of a new life. There's also a theme of balance with the equinox having equal light and dark hours at this time. It's good to take time to reflect on the harmony and polarity of this season and what that means to you. So, when I decided to make this episode, I set out to do an Ostara episode. I mean, in essence, I did, because I talked about the themes of what Ostara is and how you would celebrate Ostara. But I think that really this holiday focuses more on the coming of spring, and what we know now is that Ostara is not an actual goddess that we have history of. We don't know how people actually celebrated her or her holiday. So I think really the best way to celebrate this is just for spring. I mean, we don't have to bring a goddess into this. We don't have to bring a god into this. It can just be that we're celebrating that the earth is coming back to life. And it's a beautiful thing because we've just went through the darkness and the light's coming back. It's really magical that things that weren't there just a few weeks ago are blooming and coming back to life. And then to look at that and see how we can incorporate those themes into our own lives so that we can come back to life and just reconnect to ourselves and to the earth. So that's my closing thoughts for this episode. And on that note, that wraps it up for this episode. And thank you so much for listening. I'll be back in April to celebrate Beltane, which is also my birthday. And hopefully I can get that Wheel of the Year episode out as well before that Beltane episode. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please like and subscribe, maybe even leave a review. How do you celebrate Ostara or the Spring Equinox? Do you celebrate Easter or another of the spring holidays? I would love to hear your celebratory stories. How do you celebrate? And feel free to send me an email to letscelebratepodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Let's Celebrate Podcast and YouTube at youtube.com/Let's Celebrate Podcast. As always, all my references are in the show notes if you're interested in reading more about the history of the Spring Equinox, Ostara, and the other spring holidays I discussed in this episode. Thanks for listening and joining me on this adventure. Have fun celebrating, and I hope you've learned something new today. Bye!